Have you ever watched one of those movies where the opening sequence is the person in some sort of dream? Because that is exactly what I feel like today. Because this is incredible, absolutely incredible. I've always wanted to come to the Lake District to do some fishing, and I heard that they were catching some fish at Esthwaite Water. Now, I've never been here before, but I've literally had 2 casts in after baiting up, and I caught a huge hybrid on my first cast even, and this is a bream. And in settings and surroundings like this, I'm saying that feeder fishing does not come any better. And I can tell you how quick that bite's come, because my feeder's still got the bait in it. Hasn't even had chance to break the ground bait down and get my bait out, which is remarkable. So I'm going to put that back in there. And we're going to talk to you today about how you can catch some great big bream like this on fantastic natural waters. And I'm saying that they're not going to come much better than this venue here. So we are, like I've said, at Esthwaite Water, which is on the map next to Lake Windermere, or just above Lake Windermere, in the heart of the Lake District. It's absolutely beautiful. Look at this. We've come on a really warm, flat day, not good for bream fishing at all, as you can imagine. I was a little bit apprehensive, to be fair, because the weather is, we're having another one of these hot spells like we've had a lot of this year, with no wind, so often not very good. But I've cast out and I've found a great depth, really deep. I cast my 1.5 ounce bomb out, 40 metres, and I've got a depth of around about 8 seconds. So, 25 foot, I would have said, something like that. A lot of water there, which when you've got a bit of depth, it's going to help a lot for allow the fish to settle. We'll cast this back out. And what we're going to do is we're going to try our best to do a bit of a live session, because with 2 fish in 2 casts, I'm really optimistic that the fishing is going to be very good today. So it'll give you a great chance to basically experience this place with me for the first time. I've never been here before. I'm just sort of taking it all in, because, to catch hard fighting fit fish on a nice water like this is incredible. And this is a big place. When you look on the map, it looks small compared with the likes of Windermere and the other lakes here, but this is a big place. Gravelly bottom, clear water. And these fish are really hungry. And I think if ever you go to a big venue where there's heads of bream, roach, perch, hybrids, you have to appreciate, first of all, how hungry the fish are, how they want to eat liner straight away. They're coming to bait. On my first cast, I was dangling my worm in the water and literally 2 perch came straight away. I've thrown a few casters in here and I can see a dozen chunky perch at my feet. There's clearly a lot of fish in here. And although there'll be some natural food, when they're going to get a chance to get some food and get fed, then obviously they're going to want to feed. So you can be really aggressive with what you're doing. You're in a place where the bait's getting eaten. I'm getting liners there, rods pulling around there. There we go, look at that. That's incredible. 1.5 minutes, we're straight back in. I mean, this is my 3rd fishing cast of the day. So you can see, look at this. Oh, it's just unbelievable. You can see that there's a lot of fish there, and I was getting indications and liners straight away. And when I bring this one in, you'll get an impression for how aggressive I'm being, because we've got some new bait up feeders on the way, and I've got one of those on. I've got a great big bait up window on, like fishing, because I know that the fish, whoa, look at that. Great big head bang there. I know the fish are eating my bait, so I can be really positive, particularly today when there's, you know, there's about 3 or 4 other anglers down to my right, but I can't even see anyone to my left. Look at this, look at the bend in the rod. It's incredible how strong these fish are. You can tell how fit they must be. Ooh, I wonder if this is one of those hybrids again. That was, you know, big hybrids are something that are quite exciting. I think it might be, you know. Let's have a look here. No, I think that's just a bream. First cast was a £3 hybrid. And there we go, into a fit bream. I mean, look at him, he is pure muscle. Now, he is an immaculate bream. You know, I'm not even sure if that one's ever been caught, because he's not got a mark on him. Let's get him out here. Look at that. Look at that. Brilliant fishing. I mean, this is like, you know, if you want to go and fish big waters for big positive fish, place him nicely there. What a cracking fish. You know, this is your dream. This is your dream. Big fish like that, nice and regularly. You can be really positive with your bait and your feeder. So let's have a little look at what I'm doing. That was on 2 chunky pieces of worm. I'm gonna clean the slime off my line, as always, because I reckon I can show you what I'm doing today, and you can come and have a great day on a big venue. And if this is near you, you can have a day here. Day tickets in the office over there. So I've got my 12-foot Superior X, which is a lovely, I'm going to say it's a 60-gram rod. So, you know, you can cast a bit more than that if you want to, but I'm only fishing like 40, 45 metres, something like that. I've got braid direct, which I love for big natural venues. I've got 010 absolute feeder braid on my reel, and then I've got an 017 shocker. We do a bait up braid now, and I love using that as a shock leader, especially when there's like lots of rocks and things like that. Dead easy. I've got one of the new short feeder links, which are 55mm. Got one of those soft ones on there, and it just runs down to a knot where I've knotted on some 025 fluorocarbon. So this braid just literally is a 4-turn water knot to some 025 fluorocarbon, and that soft link can run on that braid down to that knot. It's got a tiny little swivel on these links, and it means it doesn't go over the knot. And then we've got this thick, stiff piece of line here, which helps prevent tangles, and my ever reliable 6-inch hook length at the bottom. Now, because the fish are big and wild in here, I've gone for a size 12 N50, which is a lovely, thick, open gape hook that I think will be perfect for these sorts of fish. And I'm just going to put on, see what I'm going to do, one of my favourite breamy type hook baits anywhere is 2 chunky pieces of worm, like I would say about 1.5 inches long, just because I always feel like it's nice and visible and the fish can gob that easily. I've just got a ripped piece there, so I'm going to hook that on there. That's not worked very well. He was a bit weak, he was. Let's get one that's a bit stronger. Now, sometimes you can tip that with a maggot, but you can just see there, look, 2 chunky pieces of worm. And I've got a 45-gram bait up winder feeder, which means I can be really aggressive. I'm going to fill it up with bait for now, chuck it back in, and then I'm going to show you the bait when we get back out into the water, so we can catch as many fish for you as we can. Got about I would say like a 2.5 foot hook length, something like that. Just because the water's deep, what I don't want to do is I do like that longer little bit of a drop behind my hook length, just a bit of separation. A lovely thick piece of fluorocarbon there. It's just going to lay down on the bottom nicely. So I've chucked that out. It's very deep. I can drag this back and pick up all the slack like that. Always like to pick up all the slack in my line when I'm braid fishing. So bend the rod right round, and you can just see the tip keeps coming back to you. It's not the feeder moving, it's just that the pure depth that we're sort of picking up the slack. and then bend it right. I like to bend it right round till it's locked and go, yep, I'm nice and tight. And then I just draw it along this rod rest, nice flat rod rest, until my tip's relatively straight. Tiny little bend in it there at the end. So let's talk to you about my bait selection. Hopefully the old rod goes round again while we're doing it. I've brought with me natural baits because for me, I didn't feel like this sort of venue was going to be quite right yet for pellets and corn. I'm not aware of this being carp fished at all. It was predominantly a trout fishing lake. So I wasn't sort of like thinking, yeah, it's going to be dominated by pellets and baits like that just yet. However, I've not been anywhere where fish meal ground bait doesn't work for bream. So I've opted for a fish meal ground bait. You know, people do fish here. There's, you know, it's midweek and there's probably a dozen anglers on the lake today, dotted around. Not that you can see anybody because it's that big. So I know that they'll be feeding fish meal ground bait. So that's the first choice that you've got to make. And what I like to do is I don't really want to go like overly strong, but what I'm trying to do whenever I fish a deep water is I'm thinking about how coarse and heavy to make my ground bait. So that's one of the things I wanted to focus on today for you for these big water bream. And it was how to mix your ground bait and how to use ingredients to suit the depth. So what I actually did today is I didn't mix my ground bait at home. I didn't know what depths I was going to be faced with at all. It could have been 10 foot deep for all I knew. When I chucked out and it was like really deep, like 25 foot deep, I wanted to go for something a little bit grittier, a little bit heavier, something that I felt was going to almost like not just get lost in the water, be a bit wafty. So one of my favourite ground baits is F1 Green. It's quite a neutral ground bait, but on its own, it's too soft. So I need to add some weight and grittiness to it. Now, Marine Green is a much stronger, grittier ground bait, which I don't think this venue's quite ready for in its neat form just yet. Give it a year or two of bait and I think they'll be loving it. But what I've done is I've blended those two together. So I've added that Marine Green, which is gritty and big, and I've mixed those two 50-50, so I've got like some grit in there, something a little bit more manly, a little bit more body, something that's going to really squeeze together. Then I've added in some salted caramel bait booster. Now the bait boosters are really thick liquid and it's heavy. If you pour it in the water, it literally goes straight down to the bottom. So I've added in that thick liquid to the mix to basically give the mix like a really, it's been in 3 minutes, I'm going to wind it in because I feel like there's a lot of fish out there. So basically that gives your mix like this body, it gets into the particles, it gets into the fine particles and it turns the F1 Green into a heavier ground bait. So by adding those two to my mix, I've basically made my mix more suitable for deep water, which is what I'm faced with today. You know, if I was, and of course, obviously the salted caramel is super sweet, bit salty, great smell, basically perfect for fishing. And I've done that to my mix. So effectively, when I'm chucking out in this deep water, I know that this ground bait's going to be nice and claggy and heavy and not rise up and be wafty off the bottom. And you actually saw on that first fish, which I caught quite quickly, I probably obviously squeezed it a bit hard into the feeder and it was still all there. So when it goes in the water, when I chuck it in the water here, I can see it sinking down really quickly and it looks gritty, which is what I want for this type of venue. So, you know, it's important when you're thinking about your ground bait. You know, even if you wanted to come here and go with like a sweet skimmer in deep water, like a non-fish meal mix, which I'm absolutely sure would have worked brilliantly today, I would have still added that liquid in just to give everything a little bit more body. It's a little secret of mine for deep water. I really do believe that like that thicker liquid just keeps everything a bit heavier and waftier. And like you can see there, where I've chucked that groundbait in. There is literally nothing on the surface, nothing hanging mid-water. You guys can't see it, but it's all heavy, like carpeted on the bottom. So very, very important. Then I've brought with me some worms. I brought a kilo bag of worms because I thought I was going to catch a few fish. I've got 3 pints of casters with me today because I'm wanting to fish for a full session. And then I brought with me sort of a pint of dead maggots. So really simple baits there to feed. My little kicker that I've brought with me is some salted caramel corn. Now, I absolutely love sweet corn, and I think natural venues and sweet corn go hand in hand. And something that's been very trendy at the moment, if you like, amongst a lot of the top anglers, is to liquidize a bit of this corn. Now, it's a really simple thing to do. I've kept a bit back here to show you. You want about half a tin in your little liquidizer. You can get a liquidizer anywhere. Amazon, I'm sure a few tackle companies do it, whatever it might be. I just got mine from Amazon. Got in there 3 blades. Now, it seems quite cool at the moment to liquidize this to a pulp. I'm not really into that. I like to give it like 4 or 5 pulls and basically just chop the corn. So I end up with an odd full piece of corn in there as well. But again, basically the end mix is a chopped corn. So I've got all these gritty pieces of corn, all these pieces of corn that I think are gonna be there flaked on the bottom, little yellow bits, having the fish come down and like working towards them. That's what I think is going to be like a really nice thing to do. So I think that that's a very, very good way of blending your baits together and getting everything sorted. That's what I think is very, very important. So all I've done is, once I've blended my corn, is I'm taking a handful of my corn, I'm taking a handful of casters, taking a little pinch of maggots as like a little, don't really want loads of maggots in there because I want to use maggots as a possible hook bait option. And then I'm just getting a nice blob of worms, popping them in my cup, and then chopping them nice and coarsely. I'm not looking to chop these like super fine. A couple of liners there. Not absolutely hectic at the moment, but I'm looking to chop these nice and coarsely. So probably like 30 or 40 chops, something like that. So I've got nice chunky maggot sized bits of worm, and I'm putting all of that into my sieved bait tub. So when I whiz that around there in that tub, look at that, I'm left with basically food. Corn, bits of chopped corn, casters, chunky bits of worm. That's a lot of food, that's a lot of bait that I think fish can eat. But you saw from those first 2 or 3 chucks, I've got a funny feeling here that these fish are gonna come in and blitz your bait, like eat it really quickly. You know, when I was talking to you on that first one, 6 or 7 minutes went by, probably drifted off those fish. So we're gonna keep chucking nice and regularly. So we've had a couple of chucks there without a fish. So I'm looking at 3 minutes, I'd say, something like that, where I want to be chucking that back in. I'm gonna put, I did have a liner there, so I'll tell you what I'm gonna do this chuck. I'm gonna switch my hook bait. I'm gonna put probably about half a worm, like a nice big visual bait, like that. And then I'm gonna just tip that with a fluoro maggot, so something that might catch the eye and get a fish to come in and look at that hook bait. I did have a couple of liners there. It's not like loads of liners, but I'm still going to persevere with this big feeder, because what I did just before you joined me off camera was I put in just 4 of these great big bait up feeders. I didn't want to just go in and put like 20 feederfuls in. I'm not a massive fan of that, if I'm being honest. Maybe if I was here for a leisurely day and wanting the rock up, you could potentially get a big rod out, chuck in 30 feederfuls, go to the cafe, get yourself a latte, get yourself a bacon sarnie, come back and then the fish might settle on it and you can just chuck in and not have to worry about feeding them. But I often find, bearing in mind that I'm doing a lot of my fishing in the middle of the day, I'm not getting here at 5 AM in the morning for that big bream arrival. I often find that the fish are quite flighty. They come in and out. So when they do come in, I don't want to have this situation where I've got 30 feederfuls on the bottom and basically there's a lot of bait there and a few fish come in and I just don't catch them and then they swim off, because look, the water's tap water clear. It's absolutely flat today. There's not a breath of wind. So we're just going to use the feeders to build the peg as we go. So my plan is to keep this big feeder on for maybe like 20, 30 minutes, and then I'm going to switch the feeder once I think the fish are a little bit more settled or a few have come in, and we'll take it from there. Right, it's time for that change of feeder. Now, we probably had 45 minutes or so putting that big caged window feeder on, lots of smell, scent, bait. And I just feel like I'm starting to get a few indications, like not loads of indications, but I'm getting indications, and I've had a couple of chucks now where I've had an odd indication, not a fish. Now, that usually tells me that there's not as many fish for the bait I've got there. So, stepping it down one to an XL window, and I'm going to scoop that bait in, but I've made it a solid one. So I'm going to like 3/4 fill that with groundbait. Sorry, groundbait, what am I on about? The particles there, look, worms, casters, etc. And then I'm just going to scoop a tiny bit of groundbait and pop it over the top. Now that means that bait is completely encapsulated. Is that the right word? And it's going to go down to the bottom in one piece and then not basically break up until I go to wind in. Now, the idea behind that is that the fish can smell it and they know it's there, but there's not loads of freebies. And it's a brilliant way of catching once you start to get a few indications. So let's see what happens this cast. I have also put 3 maggots on just to change a hook bait. I don't particularly think it's the hook bait. I think like when you're feeding like a mix of bait like that, you might come across a hook bait that you've got confidence in, be it maggots or a piece of worm or a chunky piece of worm. That's sort of one of the latter things I tend to think about. Try to get the feeding right first of all. So what we'll do is this will be like my feeder for like 4 or 5 casts. Again, I'm still feeding plenty of bait. You know, I want to be quite positive, particularly earlier on in my session. You know, it's a big, deep water. I think the fish are up in the water. I think they're swimming around up in the water, and I think they feel confident to feed in the deep water. I mean, there is hundreds upon hundreds of roach now, just where I've thrown a little bit of bait in here just so I can see. They're obviously not out there because I'm not getting any indications. They don't want to be in the deep water. So if you think about it, your solid window needs to go all the way down, all the way through, not giving anything off. So we've had those casts with that sort of cage window. We've kept it going. There'll be smell and scent and bits breaking off, just like almost like trying to gather some fish to where we are. And with that last couple of bites having a few indications, not like I say, not loads, just an odd, like little indication has made me think, probably a bit of bait there, quite a bit of bait there. Not all been perfectly eaten. We're on 5 fish. So, you know, we have caught, we've had a good first hour if you like, but now I'd love for them to be a little bit more pinned down and see if we can up that a little bit. So we'll have to see. There's an indication again now. So that's my first indication, this chuck, like a slow. So there is fish there eating the bait. So that goes to show we've drawn some fish in, now we've got to catch them. This is where it becomes interesting. And you know, I was saying to my cameraman earlier today, if we'd have come here on a low pressure day with a breeze, I think this would have been unbelievable fishing. But today, we've got to try and fool these fish into going down and taking a bait. Another little indication there. These are good signs, obviously good signs that there is a few fish there. But at the moment, they're probably just dipping down and hitting at an odd piece of bait. So I might even, after this cast, just drop it down to the large solid winder feeder. So a little bit less bait again, but enough. You can't go down to no bait because the fish will just eat it and clear off. But let's see if this, are we getting an odd indication? We'll just give this another 30 seconds and then we'll wind it in again. I'm even going to put a little bit of bait in that one ready. Because I think we're going to have to, work at this a little bit just to keep these fish coming, which is great. That's how I love my fishing, to be honest. I think because of the depth of water as well, you need to cast quite regularly. I don't think I would want to come and sort of cast in every like 8-9 minutes. I do believe that like a regular casting of bait. So of course, if you are casting more regularly, that means that you are feeding more bait into the peg. So obviously by doing that, you don't always need the biggest feeder on. But nice and aggressive to start with, always really important on these big sort of wild venues, till you figure out what's going on. Right, let's bring that one in. Bring that one in. We have maggots on that time. Might put a chunky piece of worm back on this time, I think. Or maybe a worm and a maggot. The old cocktail. Caught a few bream in its time, that bait has. So we're gonna flick those off. Get a nice chunky piece of worm. About 1.5 inches long. We're going to get a fluoro maggot, nice bright hook bait, and we're going to just change that feeder to that large, because I definitely feel like the fish are enjoying a bit of free bait down there at the moment, and I think that the fish that are there are very hungry. I don't necessarily think there's loads there just yet. Let's cast this out. Nice and heavy feeder, 60 gram. I'm only casting 45 meters, but it's so deep. You don't want to be messing around with light feeders. You want a nice big heavy feeder. See, like a grebe just came up there. There's going to be things that are unsettling them a little bit. Tighten up your line. Lovely. Now, one other thing that is worth mentioning is you're obviously trying to choose what depth to fish in. So when you go on a big water, I believe that the different size of fish live at different levels of depth. That's not always the same all the time. Some places you'll find at certain times of year the fish are in the shallower water, usually early season. the fish prefer the shallower water. And then as the weeks go on, the fish seem to, you know, as the water warms up, the whole body of water warms up, particularly as you go into like August, September, October, the fish tend to be a little bit more deeper water. Now, my rule is pretty straightforward. I'm looking to fish the deeper the water, the bigger the fish. And this is reflected by the fact that there's loads of tiny roach here in like 2.5 foot of water. I'm sure if you went like a little bit further out into say 8-10 foot of water, there'd be like chunkier roach and perch. And then as you go deeper and deeper still, I think that's where you might catch a few skimmers, and then you're looking at bream. And generally speaking, if you're on a venue that's deep, really deep, you know, where you could get a count of 8, 9, 10, 11 seconds, tend to find like 8, 9, 10 seconds is a great area to fish for those bigger fish, those bigger hybrids, those bigger roach. It's the place in Ireland, in big reservoirs down south where I've fished them. Anywhere where you've got those deep places, the bigger fish tend to hang out in the deeper water. So, you know, this is why my feeders and that are reflecting that sort of approach today. Still an odd indication. Well, I've got a fish on 2.5 minutes, but I don't think it's the fish that I'm after. A nice bite. Let's see what it is. Well, might just come in a bit easier. This will be interesting. Doesn't feel like a bream. Let's see what I've got. This. Oh, a little skimmer. More of a skimmer. That one. Nice. I think there's quite a few of those down there. I think that like there's a few more. I think there's some fish down there. I'm getting odd indications, and I'm just not quite so sure with it being so flat if they're down there and feeding heavy. So obviously change to that medium feeder. I think they might just need a little bit more finesse and a little bit more steady away. So even this time I'm just going to like half fill my feed, a little bit extra ground bait, a little bit more smell. Just see if I can get them competing a bit more when they are going down, because there is an odd indication, but if you look at it, it's like absolute glass now, which is, I mean, beautiful to sit here, but not perfect for fishing. You're still a pound plus fish, so it's nice, but they are flighty fish. They come down, they hit your bait, literally nick 2 or 3 bits and then go. You know, they're not like a big bream that come down and sort of like start troughing on it. A bit like me at the buffet. They actually just, they come and they, you know, especially with, I mean, look at it now, it's bright, it's flat. You've got to fish the conditions. You've got to, even when you're on a big water and, you know, you think you're sort of going for those big shoals of bream. That's why I think, you know, if I'd have sat here and put 30 feederfuls in, I think I'd still be banking. We're on 7, so. Yeah, we're catching a few. And it's making it that little bit more challenging, which is making it more and more interesting. Now, what I might do is I've got a few other tricks up my sleeve that I can use. Might put a couple of quick feederfuls in. So I might, hardly any bait, bit more ground bait, put the cage feeder on, maybe chuck it in a couple of times, get a bit of smell, scent, try and draw some fishings, but with less bait, and then put that solid window feeder back on. Might have 2 or 3 quick chucks, like 2 or 3 like 2-minute chucks, something like that. Again, just try and draw some fish in, down. But if you're going to do that, then you might even need to step it down again. You might need to step it down to, say, the medium window feeder. Oh, well, that's a slow liner. See, there is fish there. There is, you know, it isn't a day when I can say there isn't. There's clearly a lot of fish in this venue. So they just need a little bit of fishing for at the moment. I should expect what will probably happen is at some point in the day, the conditions will be right for them and they'll have a chew, and you might get like 7 or 8 in 7 or 8 casts. Very classic bream, but at the moment it's midday, it's warm, it's sunny, it's flat, it's clear. Just got to be a little bit more patient and cute with them and mix it up a little bit. There we go, look at that, another indication. There's a fish there. It's so interesting. It's so, you know, whenever I go somewhere and there is some fish to go at, I always like to think to myself, like, how's the best way of going about it to catch them? So, like, if you're not getting any indications or any signs, you're not sure what's there. But when you are getting a few signs and indications, that's when you've really got to be on your toes to thinking about what could be best for them. The big wild fish, I don't think the hook and the line or anything like that needs changing. You know, maybe looking at altering your hook baits to try and find something that they really want to eat, but I'm pretty confident they're there because they're happy with the bait that we're feeding. And I think the conditions are playing a bigger part than we think. One thing that sometimes can work as well is casting about a little bit. You know, casting maybe 2 meters further, quite a lot of liners, maybe cast out and bring my rod back towards me. So my feeder and my bait lands inside where the majority of the bait is. That can work really well. It's not always about necessarily going past, but, you know, being near, left, right. You know, effectively, if there's quite a concentration of bait in, say, this area where we are here, having one just on the outskirts, either way behind, can just be a, you know, one on its own, something stand out on its own that can get picked up. But at the moment, well, I was about to say they're outfoxing us, but we've got him. God, so interesting. I mean, you know, it seems like for ages, but it's 4 minutes on the stopwatch, so it's not ages. It's really interesting fishing. Look at it. Really interesting. This is a slightly better one again. You know, these fish, they've got very hard mouths and braid direct. It's very important just to keep the pressure on. So you'll see one of the features of this reel is that you can just steadily wind, keep the pressure the whole time. I'm not one for like pumping and winding. I just like to sort of almost like as the fish wants to kick, let it kick like that, and then just give it a steady wind. And when it wants to kick again, let it kick again. Now, this is proven a brilliant day's bream fishing. Brilliant. Oh yeah, look at that. See him flashing under the water there. Fishing heaven right here, I think. Incredible. Whatever must this be like on a day that's a little bit more suited to these fish. There we go. There we go. Oh. That is superb stuff, absolutely superb. I'm gonna keep ringing the changes, put a few more together hopefully, and you can join me for a bit of a summary of what is proving to be a brilliant Lake District bream session. Well, it's not been as easy as possibly I would have loved it, but I always find if you do get a day when you catch 30 bream, it actually becomes a little bit like boring. But today I feel like I've had to work for them, and I've had a really good session. I've just fished on for about an hour and a half there, and I've managed another 8. And each time, I don't think I've caught 2 in 2 chucks. I've had a couple where the feeder's hit the bottom and it's gone straight round. And what I'm finding it best to do at the moment is almost like have a cast out and leave it for like 7-8 minutes and see if you get one. And if you don't get one, I'll show you what I've done, because I think this is making a difference. So effectively, I believe that the fish are just prowling around off the bottom. And because I've had those odd ones like really quickly, I feel like I need to drag some fish down quite quickly. So I'm loading my feeder relatively softly, chucking it out onto my spot like this, letting it get around about 3/4 of the way to the bottom, which is about 8 or 9 seconds, right? And then just pulling it back. So now I imagine in the last like 3 foot, I've got like this little loose column of bait, which is acting as a little bit of an attractor, winding my feeder in and casting it back out again straight away. So I'm almost like double chucking. Now you can't do that every cast in. If you try to do that every cast in, you end up blowing your peg in and it's not as effective. So on this chuck now, I'll probably leave it in like 6-7 minutes, but I'm giving if I don't get one, but I'm giving myself the best chance of catching one quickly. So there I just caught one. I could have chucked back in, but having this double chuck, I feel like that's giving me a better chance of catching one again. And because you need to sort of like, if not need to leave it, but if you chucked in every like 90 seconds, because I've had a little go at that, just felt like I had 6-7 chucks and I might get one. But in that time I was building a lot of bait up, so it just seems a bit better. Yeah, so what are we on there? 16 fish, brilliant. So like literally that chuck out there, put it in, put it back in the rest, and I feel like that's giving me a really good chance of getting one again quickly, because I'm almost like going, buff, there's some bait, bit of loose bait, chucking my feeder over the top and trying to just suck one back down to the bottom because of the nature of which the conditions have been today. But let me tell you now, this has been one of the most beautiful places I've ever been fishing. I've been fishing a lot of places. So if you're thinking about going fishing, or if you're in the Lake District and want a day's fishing, you've got to check this place out. Rangers Hut, you can see the Rangers Hut on the map. Go around, get your day ticket, and you can come and fish what has been incredible fishing, really. When you think about the day that I've got here, I'm not sure anywhere else I would have caught like this. And you've seen the tactics I've used. You've seen the feeders I've used, the methods I've used, the bait I've used. They have brought results, so you can go and do it yourself. Hope you've enjoyed it. I think I'm going to catch a couple more.